Hello, welcome to our live webinar on trauma-informed care. I'm Jody Walker, and I'm the clinical director at the Crisis and Trauma Resource Institute. And I wanted to thank you for joining us and creating time in your day to learn how to build a culture of strength through trauma-informed care. We would love to hear your voice, and the best way today to do that is to use the chat function. We will have a Q&A at the end of our workshop today and a few questions posed by the speaker throughout. Speaking of the speaker, it is a real privilege to introduce your speaker today. Our Managing Director for CTRI, Nathan Gerbrand, is truly a genuine human who walks through this world with the intention of curiosity for each person's story and to learn how he can best formulate connections. I'm going to turn it over to Nathan now.
Thank you, Jody, for that warm welcome. My name is Nathan Gerbrand. I'm the Managing Director with CTRI, and I am very excited to be here with you. And especially so that we have people joining us from all corners of Canada, the US, North America, and Europe too, across our world. I am in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, on Treaty 1 territory. And let me say, I'm passionate also about history and how things connect. And let me tell you, it all does. There are ribbons of trauma impacts and resilience running everywhere. We just need to open our eyes and get a little curious. And that's what our time is about today. So for instance, my home here, Winnipeg, means muddy waters in Cree. It was formed at the meeting of the Assiniboine River and the Red Rivers. These rivers have provided transportation routes for food, for gathering, for ceremony, for Indigenous people for thousands of years, right nearby, miles from where I stand right now. I know the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the Oji Cree, and the Dene people have been coming together here to trade and make this place their home. And so today, as we explore trauma-informed approaches to building cultures of strength, I believe it's essential to also step back, to get curious, to wonder about history, to wonder about where our food comes from, where our water comes from, what's going on in these behind the scenes kind of connections. And so I invite you in the chat, feel free to post where you are joining us from. So why is being trauma informed important? I think to enter the world of thinking and acting in trauma-informed ways and building cultures of strength, we have to know a bit about trauma. And so when it comes down to it, it's all about this. Trauma is prevalent in our world. It impacts all of us, including our staff, our clients, our colleagues, our families. And the effects of trauma can ripple across all areas of a person's life. It can shape our interactions. It shapes our relationships at home and work and abroad. And so while trauma can begin at a personal or an individual level, it can spiral to other areas as well, including our relationships. And these impacts are dynamic. They get carried across time, they get carried across culture, and they get carried across generations. And so one of the most powerful and atrocious examples of this are the traumas of Indian and residential school and colonization in Canada. These continue to leave long-lasting and intergenerational effects on the physical and mental well-being of Indigenous people in Canada. This is trauma. Our workplaces can negatively be influenced by the pervasive power of trauma. Estimates are that 50 to 60% of the population experiences at least one significant traumatic event in their lives. And so if we're not careful, our workplaces can potentially amplify this reality. When any of us were in a period of discomfort or crisis, we often look to our workplaces and our institutions to support and protect us. If they fail to do so, if they inadvertently take steps that cause us to be afraid or harm us, or those we care about, that can be like a further injury. And so to be trauma-informed starts with being aware and engaging thoughtfully and intentionally on both that personal level, how I respond and care for that client, that colleague sitting across from me in that chair in my office, and on the organizational level, the systems, the policy, the HR, the values that we bring to our organization, the spaces that our organizations hold in the world. And so to work and become trauma-informed means to be in concert between these areas, considering both the personal, our attitudes, and the collective. And that's going to be part of our journey today. So if it's not clear by now, this is an extremely important topic to us here at CTRI, and one I'm passionate about. Our vision at CTRI is a world where everyone is trauma-informed. I'm going to say that again. Our vision is a world where everyone is trauma-informed. It's why we offer this free webinar. It's why we offer a free online trauma-informed workplace assessment. We develop our materials, we hire our staff, we arrange our meetings, we set up our space through a trauma-informed lens. A few years ago, I had a privilege to write a little book with Randy Grieser and Vicki Entz about trauma-informed workplaces. This is that book. It's a little book. Where do we spend the majority of our waking time? In our work environments, with work colleagues, with clients we see through work, operating under work policies and work pressures. If we want to make a real impact to change the world, where can we have the most impact? The workplace. We aspire that workplaces can be cultures of strength. And this is not just for human service organizations, for organizations that serve clients who are vulnerable. We believe that every workplace from any sector, government, manufacturing, education, will benefit from becoming trauma-informed. It's why we set up this book to be applicable and accessible, written in an understandable language to everyone across industries. The book is small, literally 58 pages. It's concise. It takes about half an hour to read. And we structured it as basically a study guide for your workplace. So there are discussion questions and reflection questions at the end of every section, and a principle that can be applied practically to your environment. And it's this book that is the foundation for what we're going to talk about today. I want to step back for a moment here and begin a bit of peeling back the layers of the onion, but what is trauma? So in the chat, I invite you to write one word that comes to mind that describes trauma. And I very much appreciate where we're starting now. This will be review for many of you, but it's essential that we lay some grounding and common terminology as we go forward, because trauma is a very complex beast. And I don't want a story. I want something skin deep, merely a sketch, the edges of what trauma is, and also a test of how engaged our group is. So I see words coming through: disconnection, pain, fear, yes, suffering, terror, isolation, abuse. The range is great. And what you are offering right now are really just the keyhole terms into stories. Just a glimpse with an ocean of context behind it. So thank you for offering those words. And without going there, we all know that there are causes to the reality of those words, to that keyhole look, to the pain, to the suffering, to the disconnection. And really, the stories are essential to becoming trauma-informed, because trauma is really about stories. It's the stories of people's lives. All of us here today have stories of trauma. These stories get sewn into the fabric of our lives. They become part of our thoughts, our actions, our very identity in many cases. They can drive us, and they can prevent us from engaging in life. Me personally, I have stories of trauma in my life. I have stories of a shock trauma, of a near-death accident as a youth. I've been robbed multiple times. I've come through a difficult divorce. Plus, I have many years of working in the criminal justice system with some of the most marginalized in society, people with complex trauma in organizations that were dehumanizing. I worked in justice and the corrections field. So people who are actively hurting, and worse, were hurting other people. And how helpless one can often feel when you're caught as just a helpless cog in that system, sometimes feeling like you're doing more harm than good. And these stories of walking alongside pain, brokenness, they can wash over a person. Sometimes they can make it feel hard to get clean after them. So for me, these stories are inexplicably tied to that organization, to that space. My colleagues, my clients, the supervision models we worked under, the tools we had to do our job, the support I received or I didn't receive. So these years and work sites, So I've had multiple jobs over the years. Some have been in that nature and some have not been trauma laden. There have been workplaces that have been, I would say, embodied as cultures of strength. They've had healthy relational systems. They've prioritized clients' needs. They valued the stories of staff. We felt safe. We felt trusted. And so as I move through our time today, I invite you to reflect not only on your current role, structures you're working with under, the people you're serving, but also your former ones. I think it's really valuable to get that compare and contrast. So maybe places that have not used the language of trauma informed, maybe you weren't thinking about that, but maybe the approach reflected a culture that we're striving for here. There are values that align with what we're talking about here. Only you know your stories. And while my trauma stories can stay with me, they're not currently front and center for me. But in many of my roles as a social worker, for the clients we supported, for my colleagues who went on stress leave, they are front and center. These stories may be shaping interactions, but they'll be impacting people here as well. And so my request is to take care of yourself today. I often think that trauma can be like a passenger in your car. It can come on board through direct, personal, adverse experiences, but depending on the role and the industry you're in, how close we work with the experiences of pain and vulnerability in others can sneak in through the back door, through our interactions, through the exposure to other stories of trauma, especially when we're vulnerable. Maybe we've taken that extra shift. We're stretched a little thin, or simply we're not prepared for it and we're triggered by the sudden sharing of another's trauma. Trauma can be sneaky, so be gentle with your emotions. It might be you. If this is you, plan already what you will do if emotions unexpectedly become too much. Contact a friend, ground yourself in your chair, plant your feet firmly on the ground. And I ask you, when posting in the chat, be mindful of the impacts of your comments on others. Post with confidentiality in mind. Back to our words for trauma. A keyhole word that really resonates for me is that of wound. I think trauma can be like a wound that injures us emotionally, psychologically, or physiologically. Emotionally, it can overwhelm us. It can create despair, helplessness. Psychologically, it can disrupt our worldview, can change our sense of security, change how we feel about a space, a smell even, or a person. And of course, physiologically, in our bodies, we can feel that impact. There are physical responses. It affects our energy. There can be tension headaches, back pain, impacting our eating and our energies there. But at the center of a traumatic experience is feeling overwhelmed and without choice. An experience that propels our nervous system into a state of survival mode. And our natural defense of fight or flight or freeze or fawn kind of realities, they take over. Again, this can be from a real or a perceived threat. And so I want to underscore here that trauma is not the event. Sometimes in language, it may sneak out. We talk about a trauma event, but when it comes down to it, the devastating experience of abuse, traumatic loss of a child, the near-death experience, those instances, that is not what trauma is. Trauma is what lingers, what contaminates, what stays with us after these experiences for weeks, months, years. It gets carried across time in our emotions and our memories and our bodies long after the event. A quick story here. Trauma, another word that really has resonated for me is that of the aftermath of an earthquake. And this is real for me because I spent a couple of years in Guatemala working for a social housing program. And the word my psychologist colleague used in their context for trauma was that of earthquake. They related trauma to an earthquake and the destruction because it was so viscerally evident. And this hit home for me one day when I witnessed this. This was my walk home from the program that one day after we'd experienced an earthquake that afternoon. It was awful. It was devastating. There were mudslides that ravished the other regions nearby, disrupted the community, the infrastructure. People died. We shifted our work focus. We dug out buildings. We offered food and support. Very practical, tangible needs we looked at. And the point I want to make here is more that traumas, they affect us all so uniquely, so differently. Some buildings, as you see on the left and right, are prepared. Maybe they're fortified to withstand. We don't know what's going on behind the outer walls. Others are not. Others might be more vulnerable. The same can be said for people. Can you tell from the outside the impacts? No. It doesn't matter how bad the event is. A theft of items that were not valuable, but intruder walked through my home. This can be as paralyzing to a person and still wound us through a sense of violation, loss of safety, loss of control, and send us into survival mode. The risk is when we don't recognize that these survival mode behaviors, for what they really are, we can quickly become judgmental, defensive. We bring in our own stuff overlaid on what we see, and we further complicate the situation rather than seeking to support and understand the person. Our nervous systems are amazing things. They're designed to protect you. They're always thinking about you in one way. Are you safe? And if your nervous system decides no, then that switch automatically flips to survival mode. And depending on your operating system, this can be that fight or flight response, the anxiety, the hypervigilance to threat. Maybe it's in a hallway or in your workplace, there's that sudden raised voice. You see someone with a clenched fist, they're leaning in a little more closely, or more aggressive. That tone of that email is just off and really abrupt. Or there's that freeze, the pulling back, the disassociation, the withdrawal. Maybe those clients that are chronically late and always avoidant, or students that just seem zoned out in class. Our nervous systems naturally do this. It's a natural evolutionary response to survive in a world with ever-present dangers. The problem is your nervous systems may get stuck in that survival mode and may be reacting as if everything is a threat. And in the workplace, what does this look like? I encourage you to reflect on that. What are the behaviors that you might be seeing? Behaviors that could be challenging for yourself, for all those around. Is that skipping of things, not being present, avoidance of eye contact, downward gaze, overly directive or controlling comments to protect what might be a vulnerable backstory? Or that's aggression, getting involved unnecessarily in power struggles. I encourage you to reflect on that and feel free to put in the chat what you might see and connecting the dots to the clues that something else might be going on. I want to shift now to focus on what is trauma-informed care. To engage in becoming trauma-informed means first and foremost to understand trauma and acknowledge and know the role that trauma can play in a person's life. Begins with this awareness. What follows is a responsibility to act. Is more akin to a process. We're entering on a journey. And so to orient ourselves on this journey and make this a little more of a clear kind of route to take, we have created 5 principles to guide this journey. They're outlined in that little book. And how we can make meaningful steps forward to bring this out to a reality. And those 5 principles, in short, are promoting awareness. Let's talk about it. Let's educate each other, staff, develop a common language that we can use so that we can be careful and catching attention when behaviors might be out of the place and might be a reaction to trauma. Let's shift our attitudes. Let's pause. Let's withhold judgment and become curious about another's behaviors. Let's provide choice. Let's provide opportunities to give back, control, empowerment, and respect when people's choices go against maybe what your lens on the world is, and be wondering and be humble that maybe there's something else there. Maybe I need tolerance. And let's foster safety. Let's think about safety in a holistic way, in all its forms. And last, highlight strengths. One way that we can overcome traumas by leaning into our personal strength, the resilience that we all hold, that we can use to battle and take steps against adversity. So those are the 5 principles that we like to outline when we think about what is trauma-informed care. Now today, you are a special group. We are going to lean in on 2 of those areas to focus and dig deeper. And those 2 are shift attitudes and foster safety. So we're going to spend the rest of our time understanding what this means and how we might apply those in our settings. So first of all, shift attitude. So this principle is a unique one. This principle is really all about you, the small inner workings of your unconsciousness and your consciousness and your attitudes. At the heart of responding to the complexity of trauma impacts is really shifting our beginning perspective. That moment we are met with behavior that might make us go, huh, might tweak our intuition, might even challenge us and put us in a place of survival and reactivity. So this is all about that internal thought process of how we meet those challenges. Really the inner monologue, the questions. We want to move away from that what's wrong with you question, the knee-jerk reactive blaming, pointing the deficit is in them, to being curious, to wonder what external factors might be at play. Maybe there's a backstory going on. Maybe this is behavior that's not intentionally designed to ruin my day. That's not personal. That's not meant to cause a disruption. To wonder what might have happened to make this behavior make sense. What might have happened to make this behavior make sense for that person? The question of what's wrong implies the problem can be fixed. It's a focus on the individual. We should try and change them. It's inherently patriarchal and paternalistic, and it applies fault and it ignores a host of really important realities like systemic racism, broader prejudice, and other issues. What's this person's had in their backstory and the tools that they might need to perform right now? Whereas on the other hand, what has happened to make this behavior make sense? It recognizes that behavior might be a natural coping response. It's not necessarily about me. And what this question does is it shifts judgment to curiosity. By wondering what might have happened to you, we focus less on what actions need to be taken. We focus less on the practical needs assessments or the services to promote and all these strategies. It's about training curiosity. Training curiosity, training ourselves to be creative and tamp down that blame within our being, about shifting judgment to curiosity. And so practically, there is strategy within this, I like to say. Practically, it's that pause, that shift to slow us down, to take a beat before we respond. Who doesn't benefit from this? When we start with curiosity, we prioritize the relationship. We prioritize support, wellness. And when we meaningfully look at another person, we become more creative. We become more thoughtful in our responses. And it allows us to focus on connection. Because when it really comes down to it, rarely is that perfectly worded response going to make something better. What makes something better, what makes an interaction better, what validates another person and where they're at and their struggles and their pain, it's connection. Now, this is not easy, but it's essential to what it means to be trauma informed. And so here, the most important thing is that moment. Like I said, it's training us in that moment. We are met with behaviors that might challenge us. Because when it comes down to it, in any workplace setting, the important things that make or break a person's day, it's actually those many, many moment-to-moment interactions that we have with each other. And as random as the lunch counter person who will give you a full serving of food or not, based on whether they like you or how they're feeling that day, or after maybe you needed the morning to tend to a sick child, and you rush into a meeting 5 minutes late, it's just begun, and your boss says, you're late, rather than, how are things at home? That small, subtle little shift, those little moment-to-moment things are really what makes people feel safe in an environment. Truth is, to meaningfully make this shift judgment to curiosity, it's difficult. It takes hundreds and hundreds of attempts and practice. And I think of it like being a great athlete in a high level of cardiovascular shape. And I'm a runner, and this is meaningful for me because when you learn a lot of techniques for being trauma informed, that's like actually learning the skills of your game, basketball or volleyball or what have you. But to actually be able to execute all those techniques, you have to be in great physical shape. And to do that, you have to train. You have to run kilometers and chronometers regularly. And you have to keep training. And you have to never let that that cardiovascular endurance slide, or else your game suffers. So I want us to practice a little bit here together. So I have 3 columns: behavior, common judgment, and a curious response. I want to put forward a couple behaviors that you might witness in your workplace. So reflect with me. Do you see this? Do you see someone in your orbit that gets mad easily? You've had those interactions, they're a little on edge. What's going on with that person? How can we train ourselves to be curious, to step away from that common judgment? That person always wants their own way. That's what's wrong with them. They have the deficit. To a curious response. And I invite you to throw that in the chat there. What might be a curious response to that kind of behavior? Possibly there's fear that underlies that anger. I wonder what might be scaring that person. Maybe this is a response from trauma. Maybe there's a protective survival brain that comes out in this way. Another behavior, someone that wants constant validation and approval. Do we have those experiences in our day-to-days? What's that protective thing response that you might give? The common societal, oh, it's their fault, they're insecure, they're needy. Rather, a curious response could be, and again, feel free, pop that in the chat. I'll give you a moment. Maybe there's been uncertainty in their life or a lack of regular validation. Maybe they've been let down by authority. They've had trust violated by others close to them. I wonder, are there ways that we can offer validation into that person's life? So when we get curious, we can come up with new creative ways of responding. Now, I want to steer this a little bit further now, because each of us is more than the sum of our trauma stories. We each have a variety of rich, identifying, defining stories. We can't talk about trauma stories without talking about resilience. In any trauma narrative, there is that story, that capacity for resilience that comes to the surface when we face adversity. It may look unique, it may look messy, it may be covered up, but we've found ways to overcome obstacles. I know for a fact we've all experienced and witnessed stories of strength and resilience in our lives. And I'd like to highlight those accomplishments. I'd like your help with that, to describe the strengths, to describe what it sounds, it looks, it feels like, to have those experiences of resilience. So I invite you to post in the chat examples of resilience from your lives. What does this look like? And not a long story, we've only got a little bit here. I want to read some of these back. So something short.
Nathan, I'm reading a hug from a client. And for me, when I think of what you're talking about here, I think of my clients that I've worked with in my practice who endured extensive trauma exposure by their work as first responders. And the fact that they can even just show up for a therapy session week after week for a long period of time are examples of resilience. So back to our chat, we're seeing perseverance. We're seeing Andrea say, finding ways to make you happy. Alyssa says acceptance.
I love Chloe says, just a hug from a client.
Yeah, wonderful things.
And Jenna, reconciliation through hiring more Indigenous staff. Yes, making more changes as an organization to be more representative, to work on your reconciliation journey. Absolutely. Thank you, Jody, for that. In some ways, I think there's somewhat of a shady side to this trauma-informed care focus, being overly focused on trauma and identifying sort of the gloomy parts of one's backstory. And so that's where I think it's essential that we keep moving forward and add this third question to our inner wonderings, this third curiosity question of what's actually going well for you. So as we strategize, as we bring this into our orbit, into our thinking, that we're moving through all 3 of these questions. The second principle that I wanted to spend some time on was that of fostering safety. One of the key aspects of a traumatic experience is a threat to safety. The experience of feeling under threat, out of control. And as a result, one of the very practical and important things that our workplaces can do to foster safety is to think about the physical and psychological safety of our settings. And so most obviously physical safety, it's free from a threat of harm, but it's also the tools to confidently do your work, the proper training, whether you're in the human service industry, to apply interpersonal skills, to connect in ways, to listen, de-escalation training, never mind clear communication, entry to buildings, railings, signage, proper, well thought out signage promotes safety. I can't underscore that. Have you considered the diverse human condition and range of the people that are coming into your space and their unique needs? And of course, this leads to psychological safety. What are your policies to highlight and respect mental health, well-being, breaks, time off, volume of work? Is it clear when there's a critical incident at your site, someone threatens staff and breaks a window? How are the emotional well-being and the needs of staff considered in the hours and the days to follow? So the lack of either of these types of safety in an organization can be damaging to productivity, to mental health, to workplace culture. And it's especially so for those vulnerable from trauma. And so to do this, safety happens in relationship. It can't be imposed or forced on someone. You can't mandate safety. It has to be co-created. So if you want to have a safe work environment, you need to involve everyone. And to do this, you need trust. Safety is inherently rooted in trust. And trust means that people can discuss safety concerns that really matter to them without fear of judgment. Did you know that the majority of people who work in the social service industry would rather risk a dangerous circumstance than professional embarrassment? Listen to that again. The majority of people who work in the social service industry would rather risk a dangerous circumstance than professional embarrassment. Do you know why that is? Because we don't trust each other. We need to trust each other that we're doing the best we can. We can all make mistakes. We can all learn from them, but we need to say and to show that we have each other's back. One thing I've learned as a leader is to establish trust. You have to build relationship. You have to work at it. You have to model best practices. You have to be human, fallible, acknowledge your imperfection. And one of the most impactful things you can do to generate trust is to say, I've made a mistake and I need your help. It's interesting, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they've conducted massive surveys through Microsoft about staff and elements of workplace culture, thousands of respondents. And one of the areas that they focused on in one of these was trust. And do you know what the key indicator that they found for trust was? A willingness to ask for help. A willingness to ask for help. This book, we did a massive literature review to create our principles and to lay a foundation for what we would all cover. And what we found that dominated that safety reality were three go-tos that were necessary to foster physical and psychological safety in the workplace. The first one of these is go-to leaders. Safe workplaces have go-to leaders, people in authority that staff have a trusting relationship with. Students have a trusting relationship with a teacher. They can go there to someone that they know has their back. I can be honest, apart from my work role, my homework assignments, that they will understand me and they will listen with care and attention to me. Safe workplaces have go-to safe spaces, physical places where clients, where staff can go to unwind, to shed the stress, to close that door, to go for a walk. This can be time as well, that there is respect that if I need time, I can take it. And I can do what I can to get back to a state of readiness. And I'm trusted to do this. This can be different in every workplace setting. And that time, that space may need to be confidential as well. So for your workplace, you need to think, what are the needs that are pressing on that space? And we need go-to peers. We need to construct spaces where people can have the time to build the relationships that are meaningful, where they feel there's camaraderie, where my colleagues have my back, where I can go to them if I have a real need. This is more than social committee kind of stuff, but the trust that staff are using their time in ways that are nourishing and meaningful to them and their interests, to do the job and to be humans in your workplace. Safe workplaces foster all three of these. We're nearing the end of our time here, and I want to underscore again that we at CTRI truly envision a world where everyone is trauma-informed. And I thank you now for joining us and taking one step closer on that journey. This is not pie in the sky thinking. There are clear areas we can focus, applicable steps that we each of us can take along this journey. But do know this journey is anything but linear. The process of becoming trauma-informed is a unique path and unique for each person. The timeline will be different, and building a culture of strength will look differently for everyone. But to start with awareness, learn, educate, read up on it. We know trauma is pervasive, and people who carry traumatic wounds are at risk of being re-traumatized in every social service and healthcare setting. It's a bit of a contradiction when it comes to our organizations that are trying to help people are most exposed and at risk of harm. We need to hold them carefully. We all need to be aware and know we each have a role to play, from the leader right down to that person in reception, to policy, to everybody. And we need to recognize, we need to connect those dots. Behavior is a form of communication, providing the clues about what might be missing in a person's life. So let's seek to be curious, look to these clues, and look beyond ourselves, our attitudes, our unconscious biases. Let's ask ourselves the questions that expand our perspective. Let's seek out experiences that might be uncomfortable sometimes so that we can grow and improve and be better at handling interactions that cause us a bit of stress. And let's act then. Let's train ourselves to shift judgment to curiosity, to prioritize connection. Let's take a survey. Let's find out where our organization is in its trauma-informed journey. Where are the strengths? What are the areas that need attention? Let's develop a plan together and co-create safety. Think of those go-tos for your organization. Thank you.
Oh, Nathan, thank you so much. I mean, it's so wonderful to hear your excitement, wisdom, stories as you are weaving in all these really important teaching points. And, you know, from my perspective, kind of wrapping up what I've heard you talk about is I can clearly envision work environments that don't have supportive leaders that are further perpetuating trauma in the workplace, both for workers and the frontline people that they're serving. But on the other side, I've also seen workplaces that have really trauma-informed leadership that make a difference, and peer support programs that make a huge impact on a workplace being safe and creating a sense of trust. So this is the hope that I hear when I hear your message of what can be imparted to workplace to make the world more trauma-informed. So Nathan, before we turn it over to the Q&A, I just wanted to turn to all of you out there and invite you in the chat. Is there a question that you have for Nathan? Something that you're curious about from what you've heard, or something specific to the content? So let me have a look here. Let's see. Jenna asks, how do you specifically work on building a culture of strength at CTRI and just generally in workplaces?
Oh, thank you, Jody. And I'll know too, Jody Walker, you're a clinical director here with CTRI, and I know you're dialed in on this, so you also can assist me here and authenticate. Are we doing this? This is an ongoing journey for us too. We never have arrived. Well, for instance, every time we bring on new staff, we teach through that book. We make sure the trauma-informed reality is part of the interview process. Everybody takes that training. But I think more than some of those actual trauma-informed awareness and steps, we want our workplace and the work that we do to be meaningful, to have meaning and impact beyond the emails that I'm writing, my specific task in marketing or what that is. And so we connect to something broader. And so what has been really important that I know any organization will create meaning and value to people is that there's something beyond that. So for instance, reconciliation and our work with Indigenous clients, we're coming up to National Indigenous Peoples Day on the 21st. We are hosting and working with other partners, so to build relationships beyond our work to highlight the realities there. And so what this does, it gives staff opportunity to be involved in things beyond their role, and to make actually impact that provides fulfillment and meaning for them as well. So we're very dialed in on the 94 calls to action as well. That's been really important for us as an organization. We also have a very clear focus on our values. We're a values-driven organization. We have 4 key values that permeate what we do, that of authenticity, we practice what we teach, togetherness, we do great work together, improvement, we actively seek to feedback and to improve, and joy. We find joy in our work and each other. So we want that to be a priority over and above the actual tasks that people have. Jody, anything else you want to add to that before?
Well, I can totally support all that you've shared happens at CTRI and Achieve. And we come back to some of the principles taught here today around building trust and psychological safety and physical safety. I've seen that it put in action in various ways in the workplace, and including when you're talking about that connection and connection to each other, connection to joy, and connection to community. I mean, we even have days where we promote staff using a day to go volunteer, right? That all builds a sense of community within. So it's a really an incredible place to work. Okay, back to our questions at hand. Nathan, we have a question that says, many healthcare workers are experiencing incredible high levels of stress and vicarious trauma. How can you enact trauma-informed principles with already overworked and stressed out staff?
That's a great question. And I think it's one I've heard a number of times too. Everybody is feeling you're working at your max. Now we have these new principles that we have to operationalize on top of what we're doing already. I mean, I think the key area of focus there is acknowledging what is happening already. Where do people have the tools and resources to do the role? When I've been in government roles, working in justice, one of the key realities that has been absent sometimes is not having that person to check with. When I'm carrying so much myself, and the pressures that come from that, and then the choices and the decisions, and then the failures if this doesn't go well, I'm owning so much more of that. And so how do we work collaboratively? So having actually really good supervision is essential within that. And so that's doing the job better, having that shared go-to leader, if you will, to come back to that principle, and then having the tools to draw from for my role. And so that there's a greater reality that comes when we share some of those opportunities. So that's that supervision check-in, that clinical support. And I think also just calling the elephant in the room here, when we're operating under high levels of stress, when vicarious trauma is real. I know from the industry, there's this sort of toughness that can also come here. You have people who've been in it for 30 years. I've handled it, you can too. And so how do we actually acknowledge and make this real, that vicarious trauma is real? It's all coming in. And so we do need to look at how we can set ourselves up that we can take care of ourselves today, tomorrow, and going forward. I think, Jody, this is a great opportunity even just to promote Vicky Entz and Marwa Fadal just recently wrote a book, Self-Care Transformed. And it's an awesome book for helpers, for people in the industry. But the key kind of point I want to highlight is how we look at taking care of ourselves. There's a structure for that, a before, during, and after. What are you doing at home? What are you doing to set up patterns of healthy behavior that you can then take care of your personal needs there, and then you come into the workplace? And what are those patterns and safeguards and clinical supervision, and how you communicate openly, and then after? And this is an excellent book to get kind of deeper with how we take care of ourselves in that industry. So there's a couple options.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Nathan. Well, I'm going to take this opportunity to thank everyone for being here today, for being courageous and curious with your questions in the chat. And I really want you to mark your calendars for our next free webinar by Achieve, which is on diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's co-hosted by our training specialist, David Young, and director of Achieve, Wendy Lowen, incredible trainers and speakers, and that's occurring on August 6th at 1 o'clock. Now, I don't want you to miss anything amazing that we're doing. So I want you to ensure that you sign up for our newsletter because you're going to hear about these upcoming events, workshops, valuable free resources, books that are being promoted and written. We do amazing things all for you to help the front line and to help you continue to thrive in the work that you love so dearly. So Nathan, again, a huge thank you for sharing. I always love spending time with you and hearing your wisdom and expertise. So thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you, Jody. It's been great spending this time with you. Have a wonderful day.